Hello, welcome to Piano with Georgia. I'm Georgia, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about some tips to play Gymnopedie by Satie. It's a beautiful French piece of music, and it's one of my favorite pieces to play as well as to teach. So hop on your bench and let's get started. So the first thing I like to do when I look at any new piece of music that I have never played is I like to kind of get a sense of the phrasing. So I will just scan through the piece of music and look for those long swoopy lines, the slurs that generally will tell you where the musical sentences are. And those will also tell you some very friendly small sections you can practice. This is not sight reading practice. We are going to be learning a piece of music, so you want to treat it differently from the get-go. You want to be more organized in your thinking, and you want to be more particular in all details, such as your fingerings, so that you don't get things stuck in your muscle memory in a way that you don't like it. So now, as I look at the piece, I've observed all these different slurs going around there, and I've now decided I want to look more closely at the notes. I notice that there are three layers. There's the melody layer, which in some editions will have the stems even going up to make that a bit more distinct. But in my edition, it just shows it as the quarter notes that are up there in the treble clef. And then there's the bass layer, and in my edition, this is the one that's on the bottom. Some will show these as all stem notes going down. And then there's the middle stuff, that layer that provides the framework for all the harmonies and all the chords that are the result of the combinations of sounds. The first layer I want to deal with is the bass layer. It is not terribly complicated, but one thing that is super important about this bass layer in this piece of music is it shows you where you need to change your pedals. This is going to be a great pedaling exercise of a piece if you've never played a piece of music with a lot of changing pedals, or legato pedal as it's frequently called. So what we're going to do is we are going to just look at the first four measures, and we're going to figure out the notes and our hand position, and then we're going to practice changing the pedal as we change those notes. We can just do this exercise with the simplicity of the first four measures, and then later when things get more complicated, your foot will already be used to the rhythm of changing at the beginning of every measure with these bass notes. So here we go. The first note in the song is a low G. Just figuring out the alphabet letter name of this note, and any note when you're playing a song, isn't quite enough. That's the first step, but you also have to figure out the location, the octave that you're supposed to play this in. I always think of middle C matching the middle of the piano. If it's below middle C, but it's pretty close to middle C, I know I'm going to generally be in this range. But if it's way down on the bass clef staff, just like this note is, I know I'm going to be a bit farther from middle C. So here's middle C. This is the first G away, and there's the next G away. The score indicates a suggested finger number of finger 2 on this G, which I like because it puts my finger 5 already on the D that is the next note. First step, just practice getting your pedal foot ready, adjusting your bench, and going back and forth between G and D and changing that pedal. Now, if you hear a thump, I call this a thumpy pedal for obvious reasons. All that means is that you're releasing your pedal all the way and maybe even releasing it too fast. And those dampers are going down and actually making a sound as they hit the keys. You can completely eliminate this by simply paying attention to your foot. You don't actually have to lift it all the way up on most pianos. You can find that point where it's on, and then it's gone. So on whatever instrument you're on, I suggest testing out that pedal. Now let's get on with it. Left hand is set up. I've got my foot on the pedal. We're just going to go back and forth between G and D. G, the pedal. Up, down, up, down, up, down. All right, now one thing, I just sort of dove right into the notes because I was excited, but I neglected to look at two very important things in any piece of music. The first one being the key signature. That's the area where you will see sharps or flats that the composer did not want to write in everywhere, so they used this little shortcut of putting them at the beginning to tell you, in this case, all Fs are going to be black key F sharp, and all Cs are going to be black key C sharp. So we're just supposed to remember that. You can always play a scale to get yourself thinking in the right key. The key of this one, you know, there's the major key, which is D. There's the minor key, which is B minor. So you could go through a quick little review of your scale just to get your eyes and your fingers thinking of the topography of D major or B minor if I switch my fingers over there. There's also another thing here at the beginning that's very important, the time signature. This one is in 3/4, which is just telling you there are 3 quarter note counts in every single measure. So now as I go back to playing those bass notes, I can make sure I'm already feeling a 3 sense. A 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The next part of this song, let's look at the melody. Now right away, the melody hasn't started yet. You have 4 measures of introduction. When the melody starts, the first place you see it is in measure 5. So next I want to go to measure 5 and I just want to play the first little segment of the melody. I set up my right hand. Again, my edition has suggested finger 3 on F sharp, which I'm going to go ahead and do. I like the fingerings in this particular edition. I usually end up changing 1 or 2 here or there just to suit my personalized hands, and you feel that same freedom. Remember about fingering, the most important thing is to do it the same way every time so it gets in your muscle memory. If you are playing something that's different than whatever is on the score, write it in so you don't forget. Future you will be grateful. All right, melody. Right hand, here we go. I see a rest on beat 1, so I'm just going to simply feel that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. And that's going to be our first little phrase that we're going to do. Now, I was able to just play those notes without any struggling there because I've played this piece a whole lot of times before. If you need to, go very slow and ignore the rhythm and just give yourself permission to figure out the note names. So you could go along, you could say the alphabet letters, you could say how far away you're going, and if you're going up or down, for example, I could say F sharp, and then I think about the next note. Okay, finger 5's gonna be on A. Okay, 4 on G. Okay, 3 on F sharp. Going along like that. If you need to, you may be able to play this melody by itself very beautifully and easily the first time you approach it. But if not, that's what to do. Now the other way would be to think directions. You start on your F sharp with finger 3, and now I'm going to go up a third, I'm going to go down a second, down a second, down a fourth, down a second. Now I'm just stepping up more seconds, and then another fourth. So those directions can help you a lot if you've played your scale, you know what notes you're kind of approaching. You really don't have to think about the alphabet letters that much if you're comfortable feeling the shape. So the next layer we have is the middle layer. Now the middle layer of this piece is thick. There's usually 3 notes at the same time. A lot of times they make chords that you're going to be very familiar with, so you can use that knowledge of your chords if it helps you. If it doesn't help you, you can use your visual knowledge of the shape with the black keys and the white keys that you're going to see with your hands. So again, I'm giving myself permission to leave stuff out. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning. And at the beginning, you have two choices. Right hand isn't doing a melody yet. And so usually I just kind of go easy on myself for these first four measures, and I avoid the inevitable technical jump that is one of the big technical challenges of playing this song. And I kind of cheat and use my right hand. But I have also seen people go ahead and dive right in and play it with your left hand, the low note, and the middle you're jumping to. For our purposes right now, we're just figuring out notes, and so it doesn't really matter which hand you use. The first chord is this one, and looking at it all by itself, it's B minor, and you can even see a little teeny weeny B minor written there in my score, and that's from years ago when I was first learning this piece. Now, if you also include the G from our bass, suddenly it turns into a G major 7 chord. So kind of an interesting thing right there. Don't worry too much about your theoretical analysis being perfect. You're not in theory class. You're trying to get shapes and sounds stuck in your hands so you can play a beautiful piece of music. So if it helps you to think B minor like it did former version of me, then fine, do so. But here's your first chord. Now as I go to the second chord, I notice the top note stays the same and my bottom two keys go down. And this creates an F sharp minor sound. It's in an inversion with F sharp on the top. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it too much. But if it does, that's wonderful. Now, if it doesn't make sense to you, feel free to go back and watch a video about chords and inversions. I have one. This is really a helpful way for you to see in groupings of notes instead of stacks of individual notes. Again, you have your changes of alphabet letters, but I like to use shapes. I like to notice what stays the same and what changes. Very helpful. So I've got my chord, and then my second chord. And here I'm using the fingers 4, 2, 1. That's what's written on my score, so that's kind of just what I did without thinking about it. You could also try 5, 3, 1 and 5, 2, 1. Then the only finger you have to really move is your thumb. But your right hand is going to stop playing this soon anyway. Pick whatever feels comfortable. Get used to those chords, and then it's time to start putting layers together. First thing, the introduction. We're going to combine the base layer with the middle layer. And like I mentioned, I'm going to use my right hand because I like to make life easy when I can. So I set up my left hand, I set up my right hand, I get my foot on the pedal because this song, it sounds kind of empty-ish and dry if there's no pedal. So I like to start incorporating some of the pedaling, some of the dynamic thinking right away because all of these things work together in your muscle memory. So I set up my right hand, set up my left hand, get my foot ready on the pedal, and as my left hand goes down, I'm going to push my pedal down. And I've got my G, and then my pedal, and my right hand goes. Now up, down with the pedal, and then my right hand goes. Up, down with the pedal, right hand. Up, down with the pedal, right hand. Now one thing to be careful of, there's a rest at the beginning of each one of these measures in the middle part of the song. You want to make sure you let those go with your right hand so when the pedal clears, that sound goes away and all you're hearing is the bass, the new bass tone at that particular moment. So again, here's my setup for the opening measures. Now with my left hand, notice I can keep it smooth with just my fingers, no pedal. It's helpful to do that in case you make a mistake with your pedal, But it's great to practice not needing to be completely perfect in your finger legato, because what is coming in the next 4 measures is left hand is going to be responsible for both of these parts. So let's go ahead and hop over there. Now left hand has a jump. One of, like I mentioned, the real technical difficulties in this piece is how much left hand has to move, and it's big moves. So it's like practicing jumping big distances. The good news is these chords are the same as the introduction chords, and left hand's bass is the same as the introduction chords. So the only change here is that left hand has to do all the work. So when I set up for that bass note G, where your eyes need to be is where are you going? You could even touch it with your right hand, really see it, and then go ahead and play, move, and then the second you are here and you've got it, your hand is there, get your eyes down here for the D. And if you're thinking, how am I going to look at the music and look at all this at the same time? Truth is, you probably can't. Now that said, different people have different feeling about this spatial intelligence. I know some people, they can like jump without looking all day long and they will be 100% accurate. It's like they just have this innate feel for it. Now, I have practiced jumping most of my life because that's something that does not fall easily into my skill set. I have to work really hard to be able to make big leaps without using my eyes. Usually, to help me, I just will memorize at least little portions of a song so I can aim with my eyes, and then my hands know where to go. And then I can glance up strategically at the music so that I can incorporate the next notes and not have to have everything memorized. So now let's practice the left hand jump. You're setting up your low note, looking at your high chord where you're going. Move. And then looking down, you get your D, change the pedal, move. Go extremely slowly as you do this. Another thing to think about, even though these notes are new, these jumps are new, if you can, think about your bass note being a more important layer than these middle chords, and play these middle chords as softly as you can, which means you need to touch them with your fingertips before you play them. If you're jumping and you kind of are woo, that's gonna land kind of loud, and I didn't even land very accurately. So play the bass note, touch, play. Bass note, touch, play. Just do these 2 chords. They come over and over multiple times throughout the song, so you won't just be working 2 chords, you're gonna be working a lot of the piece. Now the next thing to think about is melody incorporation. By the way, these 4 measures are the same basic practice steps for every single line of this page. It's usually in most editions a 2-page piece, the second page being almost identical to the first until you get to the end, and it has a special ending, and instead of ending in D major like the key signature indicates, it has a surprise in store. The final ending ends in D minor. So let's get our melody going. Again, you might want to review it all by its lonesome. Think about how you might want those melodies to go. Now, if you have a note play a little louder than you really wanted it to, that's okay. This is part of what you're practicing when you play the melody by itself. You're teaching your ear the flow, the finger numbers, the note names, the rhythm. You're also teaching sound levels. Now there is in my score a big crescendo and then a little decrescendo, those little hairpin crescendo styles that look like little mouths facing each other. What that's indicating is that you're going to start very soft, gradually grow, and then right around in here is your loudest part, and then a a little fade for the last note of the phrase. So you don't get much time today, crescendo, just one little note. Now, I've also heard other people interpret it differently. I've heard people do more like louds and softs within the phrase. That is up to you. That is your time to be an artist and decide exactly how you want those dynamics to work, but make sure you do something. Otherwise, you sound monotone, and that will be boring for you and for anyone you play it for, too. So make it sing. Sometimes people are actually very successful at incorporating dynamics into their melody if they literally sing the melody. Your voice will want to get louder and softer pretty instinctively, and you can then think about how your vocal cords did it and try to make your fingers do a little more singing. Okay, back to what we were doing. Right hand, let's say you've done right hand alone. Now it's time to incorporate some layers together. I like to practice different layers in combinations before I just do it all. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play my melody, and I am just going to play my bass. This is going to mean that I'm also adding the pedal in, and I am just going to hear how those sounds work. I'm going to also feel how the left hand bass is going to help me observe that rest right before the melody starts. So let's try it. Bass and melody. And do that a few times. Get comfortable with those sounds. Then you could also, similarly, leave out the bass and just do the middle chords. And now you have to imagine beat 1 on the left hand to kind of get us going. So I'm going to feel like a 1, 2, 3, 1. That might feel a little weird because the sync of the middle notes with the melody are on beat 2 of every measure, and you're not feeling that nice strong 1, which the bass will provide. So let's do that now. Putting all 3 layers together, and on this I would recommend going as slowly as you need to think through everything. So left hand, here we go. You're taking the lead. Very slow. Get down. Get back up. Get down low. Get back up. Get down low. And come back up. And that's going to be the basic sequence of events through this whole page, phrase by phrase, working the bass, working the melody, working the middle, and then putting them in different combinations until they're all together. Now, I do want to show you some particularly tricky little elements. The first one is coming at us right in measure 9. Now, in simplifications of this song, you really don't see a whole lot of change, but this is a spot where they always change this. So in the right hand, you have this F sharp that plays at the downbeat of measure 9, and then it's supposed to hold for the next 4 measures. But you need the same F sharp played for the chords that are happening on beat 2. So this requires a little bit of fancy finger work and incorporating that fancy finger work with the pedal. Here's how it goes. So you play your finger 4, catch it in the pedal, now you play your chord. Now don't let it go with your finger. Everything else lets go, you change the pedal with your bass note. Now you play it again. Hold it, change the pedal with the bass, play it again. Hold it with your finger, change the pedal, and play again. So that little trick of holding that F sharp so it's not lost on our beat 1s when the harmonies change and we clear the pedals with our bass note, that's really important. And it's a small detail, but I think it's worth doing. Even though, like I said, simplifications of the song will have that left out. They basically have you play the F sharp and then they just show the chords in the following measures. So I think it's worth it. And plus it's just a good skill, finger independence of being able to release some fingers in your hands without releasing all of them. The next tricky spot you're going to experience is simply the notes in some of these middle harmonies. As you get down farther in the piece, we are going to shift away from our F sharp minor and our B minor feels there for our left hand. So if you look around measure 18, measure 19, measure 20, you're going to feel these chords start to get a little bit less predictable. So let's just go through those chords. When I see series of chords, I like to think of two things. Are there any notes that are in common? If there are, that's going to be like my anchor to help me find the next chord or figure out what the next chord is. In this case, we're jumping in between all these chords, so it can't really physically help us, but it can help us to just see where things are connecting as we make these jumps. Right now, we're going to forget the bass notes altogether, and we are just going to look for notes that are in common. Now, the other thing I look for when I see strings of chords is how are the notes changing? The ones that change, are they going up or down? Are they going like just one step? Are they going a skip? Just those little details can really give you, again, the feel of the kind of the topography of the chords as they go along. So let's start in measure 19. Measure 19 is another instance that, much like measure 9, you have a long sustained note that's tied through the measures. You need this E to be held. Now this one, unlike the first one where the F sharp is repeating, now the E doesn't have to repeat. You just simply need to hold it. There's two different ways you can do this. You can play it with your right hand. You'll be playing that with the finger 1 after you're coming from your melody. You can do a finger trade, get the other notes, do another finger trade, get the chord, do another finger trade, and get the next chord. Or you can let your right hand do the E, and left hand continues to do our jumping motion and get the other notes. You just have to kind of get right hand out of the way, so left hand can go on top there. So 2 choices there. I think this one's a little easier than measure 9. Now we're going to jump to measure 22 in the left hand. And I just want to go through these chords with you because they can be a little tricky. So the first one we have, it'll feel like an A minor chord. If you think in chords, it actually is an A minor chord because the bass note's an A2. Yay! Anyway, so here we are. Now I notice the E on top stays the same. Bottom 2 notes are going to change and go down. Now the next one, I notice the B and the G are staying the same and D's on the bottom. And then the next one, I have everything kind of moving downward. Then the only note that changes is my middle note. And this, I'm going to stop because it's a phrase. So I would practice those chords in succession over and over. If you start doing the chords here and you go all the way to the end of the page, by the time you get to the end of the page, you've kind of lost a little bit of what those chords were at the beginning. You could even simply go back and forth between 2 chords, like the first one here and the second one here. Just get to know those 2 chords, and then let's implement the jump. Now I'm going to a D. Just do that over and over till those chords get comfortable. Then we don't want to develop any pauses between the measures, so I am actually going to start on the same measure that I ended. Go into this chord right here, little kind of E minor feel, and I have the jump. I go back to D, and then I go to my new chord. So that's the second way you're going to want to practice these chords. Just to review, the first way is just playing one chord after another, no more than 5 measures. The second way, implementing the jumps and playing about 2 chords at a time, 2 measures. Now when 2 feels easy, switch into groupings of 3. When 3 feels easy, switch into groupings of 4. You get the gist of that. Make it bigger gradually. Again, some of these sounds are a little bit unexpected. When I have multiple layers like this and I just want to double check my notes and get my ear trained on what sounds I'm listening for, because some of these sounds, you'll think you're playing a wrong note the first time you play it. As you get used to hearing it though, what sounded wrong kind of starts sounding right, and then it starts sounding like the way it's supposed to be. What I like to do to help me is I use my right hand to play the middle harmonies, and I use my left hand. So I'm taking out the technical aspect of jumping. So let's just go through, and again, I would encourage you to do this in small groups. I want to not make this video last forever, so I'm going to go ahead and just play these chords with the bass notes for the rest of the page. I'm going to go ahead and go back, and I'm going to start in measure 22. So here's how the sounds will go. I'm pedaling here. You can choose to ignore the pedal or go ahead and put it in. Notice the D on the bottom is consistent. And left hand changes. Here's that chord shape from the very first couple of measures. Now, right here at the end, things get more active. I'm still going to cheat and use my right hand where I can. Now in this part, you actually will be able to use your right hand for some of these notes. Looking at these last 3 measures, hold up a bit, things change. We're going to want to practice this differently because things are kind of grouped differently. Left hand has your bass, but then left hand has to come up. See how that can sound wrong initially? And then you're here. Meanwhile, right hand also is involved in chord stuff. Now let's go back to measure 37. Left hand, we've already done. Right hand, let's just do the middle harmonies. So I have a D, I have a D and a G, and then I have my first big chord, and then, now as you play these big chords, 100% it will be difficult to get them all to sound perfectly together. They might do that on you. So touch all the keys before you play them. You'll notice I'm choosing to use finger 4 here. If you have larger hands, you might prefer a 3. For me, that feels like icky, so I don't want to do it. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 4, 5. Touch the keys. Go all down. These big stretches can make your hand really tired, so the moment you are done, don't press anymore. Relax, use the pedal to grab it, and then get the next big one. Touch it, go down, and then relax and let it go. The next thing you're going to want to do after you're very comfortable with all those chords and how they change is probably my favorite part, messing around with the melody, getting to know the melodies. The first 3 phrases, you will not have much trouble. There's a lot of repetition. Starting in measure 22, things start to change a bit. So these I'm going to play through just so you're used to the sound that you want to hear. If you're already familiar with this song, you're going to recognize it, of course, but it sounds different when it's played at a slow tempo and you're isolating the melody. So I want you to hear that. So I'm at measure 22, and I'm just going to play this next little phrase. right. So you want to practice that by itself in isolation. Right hand has a couple of notes that are non-melody notes that come in. This is going to require a bit of balance. You want those half notes to sound like something that's different. They really match the harmony, the middle chord notes, better than they do the melody, but it's just nice for right hand to be able to play them because right hand can reach them more easily. The next phrase, I'm going to now play through this melody. I'm just, again, observing the finger numbers that are in my score. If these finger numbers feel a little awkward for you, again, feel free to change them, but write it down. Next phrase, starting in measure 26, going into 27. When those thumbs playing really soft, that's important. Something to listen for is the fade of your D on top. Listen for that. That thumb has to be softer. So the second one's a little harder than the first one because there's more fade happening. When you're playing the pedal, the fade won't be quite as severe as when I'm just playing it that right hand alone. Now the last phrase, and this is a long phrase, but this is the last phrase of this first section of the piece. So let's go ahead and dive in and do that phrase. There at the end, there were a couple of underlying notes that are not part of the melody. You could choose to just practice the melody and leave those off so you have a more pure melody. I chose to put them in so I could go ahead and make sure I was practicing fingerings that will enable me to play everything that's there. The last thing you want to do is start adding all the layers together. You could, instead of going through the whole big section and doing everything with the bass, everything with the middles, everything with the melody, you could go back and just do one phrase at a time, and instead of focusing on the next notes, just do that one phrase over and over. And I think you'll feel a little bit more gratification if you do it that way, because you'll start to have those phrases at the beginning sound like the piece that you're dreaming of playing sooner versus later. Finally, let's just listen to the way these phrases sound with both hands. I'm going to again hop to measure 22 because this is where some significant changes happen. So my right hand is set up, left hand. Now, as you first put all of this together, it's a lot to think about. So go as slowly as you need to go. Talk your way through it. There's help in narration. I don't know exactly why, but it does. Makes you stay focused, I guess, and think about the right things at the right time. So here I go, measure 22, everything. Change your pedal. Move that left hand. Little squish in the right hand. So as you go through that very slowly, you have the time to check out your jumps, aim carefully, look at the music because it's new, but then also get your eyes down on the shapes on the keyboard because that's where you need to get to, hopefully without playing wrong notes and then correcting. You want to avoid that wrong note and then fixing it as much as possible because that also gets learned into your muscle memory. One other thing is you practice the technique of jumps. You will find that you may end up with what I call searchy hands, meaning that maybe you've played a chord up here, and then instead of going directly to the next note, left hand's kind of like, it's down here somewhere, and it's like, oh yeah, it's D. We want to avoid the searchy hands. Go back and forth on these jumps and go precisely to where you want to land. Get there with your eyes first so your hand doesn't ever meander because, again, that too gets stuck in your muscle memory. You can practice this with the sounds. You can also just practice it touching the keys. I find it more gratifying to go ahead and play the sounds. You can do it with the pedal, you can do it without the pedal. But for example, if I'm playing this chord A minor in measure 22, before I jump to that D and have a searchy hand, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to aim for it, and then when I know exactly where I'm going, I'm going to move. And then I'm going to play it. So work that way, and you will have hands that want to go to the right notes instead of hands that want to randomly go towards the right note. Now let's go to measure 26. Let's do a very slow playthrough of that phrase. I'm going to set up everything that I can before I start. Notice how my right hand thumb, it's already on the E before I even get going. Watch my right hand and notice how my fingers are reaching and setting up on the next notes before I need them. You want to practice that because it won't be automatic at first. You'll need to kind of place those fingers, but definitely place them in advance of playing them as early as you can. And now I'm going to start measure 26's, pick up into measure 27, and play the next phrase very slowly, setting everything up. Here we go. Now the last phrase of this section, I'm going to go through that again very slowly, setting up before I start, getting fingers on as much as I can, and then I have to deal with the jumps that come. Now there's one more phrase in this song. The only phrase you have not played is in the second section of the song at the very end. Everything else is absolutely identical. You'll even see some versions that have this with a first ending, second ending. So let's jump to the final phrase of the song, which starts at the pickup to measure 71. Go slow enough that you can think. This is some tricky stuff. That's correct, believe it or not. F natural this time. And F natural. Did you see that? I almost played F sharp. As you get going on this piece, anticipate that the last line of the first section and the last line of the second sections are going to be the trickiest parts. Right hand has more notes that are harmony notes alongside the melody note, and some of the harmonies themselves, they just don't sound quite as intuitive to your ears. So as you're going through this first page, you're feeling like, woo, I'm doing good. And then things start to like really slow down as you get farther and farther down the page and you feel like giving up because it's not coming together. It's hard because it's hard. So it's not just hard for you, it's hard for everybody. So when you reach the hard spot, do not give up. Just break it into those small little bites. One measure at a time, maybe one beat at a time. Go as slow as you need to go and keep doing it over and over, and it's gonna happen, I promise. I hope that these tips on this beautiful piece of music will help you get to your version of Gymnopedie sooner versus later. Please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments if you're stuck or if you have trouble, because I love to read your comments and I would love to help you out with your specific problems. I'll see you again soon.